Moonlight Somata, a song of bodies in moonlight. Words by Jay Odjick. Art by Krytal Cox. Narrated by S. George Lee. For Joanne. Once, on an eve just exactly like this, surrounded by nothing but chilling wind's hiss, a young man stood perched at the edge of a cliff, as lost souls may be found, wayward, adrift. He shut his eyes tight. Could he end this tonight? Asked himself before lowering his head. He stepped back and departed instead. Perhaps some other night, courage found he'd take flight. But for now, he felt shameful and weak, his future uncertain and bleak. He walked through the park as daylight gave way to dark, knowing things would not change till the end. He moved, drowning in thought, when his feet struck a spot that told head it should lift from the ground, and his eyes struck a sight that sent heart off into flight, and his thoughts strayed from falling far down. She was blazing bright light, amid pale and gray. They looked at each other, and why neither could say, but everything else seemed to just fade away. Though both timid, reserved, both soon felt it absurd, as it felt they'd known one another for years. For hours they talked, neither watching the clock, before phone's obscene chime interrupted their time, and she rose from her seat like a shot. "I'm sorry, I must go." Her eyes now grown wide, he stammered and asked why this could no longer last, and she said there was no more time. She whirled as she walked, her eyes filling with fraught as she voiced this imminent plea. "You would not understand, but I urge you for now, trust me on this. You must flee." The young man went home to a sleepless night spent. His mind could not shake the memory of her eyes, voice, nor scent. The following night, and every night after, no matter the storm, the crisis, disaster, an illness, disease, unless he were dead, this promise he made from his bed. The young man would return in search of the girl for who his heart yearned. Again and again, each night, though in vain, he sat on that bench, he called out her name. He never gave up. His search never aborted it, and on the 30th night his faith was rewarded. Along the girl floated to the bench where he sat. A smile on her lips made his heartbeat move fast. He held back from revealing that his mind couldn't shake thoughts of her, turning from moment he'd wake. Mustering courage, he reached for her hand, but wound up revealing much more than he'd planned. The girl's eyes grew wide as she looked down at his arm, as she saw some old scars from times he'd done himself harm. He pulled back from her, as her eyes now grew sad, but she grabbed his hand tight and she said she was glad that he'd come back to find her, because she had feelings too, but there were things he'd be scared of if he only knew. She said he'd never understand such things, with a sigh. The boy squeezed her hand and said, "Please, let me try." He told her his community, the young man had fled, filled with memories of a car wreck that had left parents dead. His life, said the boy, had been in deepest dive, until that one evening she made him feel alive. She shut her eyes tight as her teeth bit her lip, as brain battled tongue lest she let some thing slip. She leaned back her head and let out a loud cry when she saw that above them full moon now hung high. She rose up once more, saying, "No, it's too late," as the boy asked, "What's wrong?" saying he'd like to give aid. The girl said with purpose, "I'm sorry, but this must be done." The boy tried to follow, but the girl now screamed, "Run!" The girl sped away. From him she fled, as the boy called out to her, on his knees in her stead. After a moment, The young man did rise, and he followed behind her despite all her cries. He followed behind her through branch, leaves, thick brush, for what seemed like forever before hearing a loud crunch. And the young man's legs froze, seeing before him a she-wolf now strode. The boy stumbled backward. Tripping, he fell, and the wolf came upon him, close enough he could smell. A scent never forgotten, one etched in his mind, his heart, his soul, and he thought even if blind, he'd recognize her anywhere, from her smell, her blue eyes. Even in wolf form, through them her soul he could find. He knew in a moment this to be her. Her teeth neared his throat. As the boy touched her fur, he said, "I see you in there, and if this must be, then please do it quickly, but not just for me. For if my death you may have any memory of, please remember, it's you that I love." He saw blue eyes flicker, and the wolf turned and ran. After a moment, he said, "I understand." It was she the next time who returned to the park to find he was absent. She alone in the dark sat on the bench and for hours did wait, before a tear left her eye and the girl cursed her fate. 1 full month had gone by before she let out a small sigh, as on the 30th night, as daylight did wane, to her delight, her search was not in vain. She told him, "I'm sorry for that which you saw, but perhaps now you realize that I'm broken, cursed, flawed." The boy smiled softly and said, "That's okay." He told her, "I am too. And that's just the way that this foul world leaves us." And he said, "Please believe this. Before I met you, my world was cold, dark, and gray. It is now filled with color, vibrant. Just stay." He wiped away her tear, and as his arm reached out, he was dismayed to hear a noise leave from her mouth. As her eyes darted to a bandage on his arm, wrapped up in gauze, she said, shocked and alarmed, "Is that 'cause of me?" As the boy shook his head, No, you will see." "Please give me a chance, let me explain." As the girl stood and cried and she turned away, she looked up once again as the full moon rose above trees and said, "This is the last time like this we shall meet." To her surprise, his gaze met her eyes as he said with a calm and quite even tone, "It's okay, I promise. For a while I've known. You have things put upon you. You call it a curse. But I also know that I cannot reverse this change that is coming, the she-wolf that is thrumming from inside of your chest. It's clear to me now. I know you must go." The girl did look back as she headed for the trees, saw her love stand up before turning to leave. She told herself he would be safe at least, but she could feel her heart crack as she turned now to beast. As wolf she sat perched at the edge of the cliff, her howl rising high, but before she'd been there long, a sight struck her eye. To her stark surprise, the tree line did part, and she saw it just then. Toward her it walked, approaching a male wolf, tall, strong, and bold, majestic and lean, a sight to behold. It strode up beside her, kneeled, its head bent, and toward her its right paw this wolf would extend. She gazed at it, puzzled, and he gestured with muzzle toward her to take it, and she reached out to him shaken. And that's when she would see, from front to underneath, the wound on its front leg, not from blade, but lupine teeth. She looked in the wolf's eyes, and there could be no mistaking. This was the one for whom her heart had been aching. She blinked and looked closer. Yes, it was he. As her mind searched for answers, how could this be? He howled now then, saying that he had been off in search of one who could transmit a condition like she had. He'd got himself bit. He said, "Love is not about changing those for whom it is felt. Love is acceptance, and this hand she'd been dealt was one he'd share with her. by her side as he knelt. They sat on the cliff, at the edge of the world, and the forest did shake, as together they howled.